With that, we will go to our first opening statement, Mr. Torbenson.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. For anyone keeping track of my health, my ears popped this morning, which is a good thing. Home. There should be no safer place for the children in your community than their home. Home. It's where each one of you go from refuge from this world on every night. It's your safe place. From all the ills, from all the dangers, from all the events in this world. It's your peace. For Alexavier Pedrin, home was a place where this defendant treated him different than any other child in the home. Home was a place where this defendant kicked Alexavier in his chest, in his face, in his body. Home is a place where this defendant took her hands and wrapped them around Alexavier's neck and choked him. Home is a place where this defendant struck 6-year-old Alexavier in the face, in the body with her hands. For the last 14 hours of Alexavier Pedrin's life, there was one and one only adult home with him, this defendant. 14 hours. Alexavier is not here. He has passed away. His death has been ruled a homicide. Alexavier can't tell you what happened to him, but his body speaks volumes about those 14 hours. Alexavier had multiple blunt force injuries to his head and to his face. Bruises on different planes, different sides of his face, different areas of his head, each one requiring a different blow to inflict the injury. You're going to hear from the local medical examiner who was present when the autopsy was performed. You're going to hear that they started to shave away Alexavier's hair during the autopsy process. As they started to shave his hair away, it revealed more bruising. And so they had to keep shaving, and yet still more bruising. So they kept shaving until his entire set of hair was gone so that they could document every single bruise, every single injury on Alexavier's head. That boy was put in the ground with no hair. He had a healing laceration to his right eye. This is important, and we'll talk about that laceration in a little bit, because one night previous, on February 10th of 2023, at around 7 p.m., law enforcement visits the home. They're there for a welfare check on Alexavier. They ask to see Alexavier. This defendant does everything she can to minimize the amount of contact that law enforcement has with Alexavier, how much they can see of his body. They do see his face, and the one injury that they note when they see his face is that single scab above his right eye that's noted at autopsy. Alexavier had a 7-centimeter laceration, abrasions to his neck. They were in parallel linear lines. He had multiple contusions within his hairline that we discussed. His brain suffered hypoxic ischemic injury. That injury can be inflicted in many ways. One of the ways that injury is inflicted is through choking and lack of oxygen. Another way that injury can be inflicted is by the administration of a drug that shuts down the nervous system. Another way that injury can be inflicted is when you don't have enough blood flow to your brain to deliver oxygen. Alexavier had all three of those. He had multiple bruises to his chest, to his back, contusions to his buttocks, abrasions to his penis, 100 milliliters of blood in his peritoneum cavity, bleeding that was described by the forensic pathologist as extensive in his mesentery and in his small intestine. A 3-centimeter laceration to his liver, hemorrhaging to the pancreas. He had an acute, which means a fresh, posterior rib fracture to his 10th rib. He had a pattern of dehydration to his body. His eyes were sunken in, his rib cage was visible. Contusions and abrasions on all of his extremities. He had a casted leg from a previous fracture. And we're going to talk about that right femur fracture more in a little bit. His post-mortem toxicology results showed Xanax in his bloodstream. Alexavier J. Pedrin was a battered child. And the evidence will show that it was this defendant who repeatedly battered him. And it is this defendant who is responsible for Alexavier no longer being alive. So how did all of this come to be? At 9:25 a.m. on February 11th of 2023, this defendant calls 911. She says she needs an ambulance right away. Her son is on the ground and not breathing. I want to repeat that. The defendant said her son is on the ground and not breathing. The defendant said she had an old bag of medication on the floor, that he must have got into those drugs, and she doesn't know which drug he got into. He's 6 years old, you'll hear her say on this 911 call. The call is transferred to someone to walk this defendant through performing CPR. This defendant tells the person that the call is transferred to that she woke up that morning looking for the defendant around, Alexavier, the victim, around the house. That she found him on the ground again. She's now said twice in this 911 call that Alexavier is on the ground. He's not moving, and that he got into her medication. She has now said that twice. On the 911 call, she says that she tried to administer CPR, but it didn't work. That Alexavier was not breathing. And as the dispatcher is trying to talk the defendant through performing CPR, first responders from the La Crosse Police Department are arriving on scene. Within 4 minutes, they are knocking on the defendant's front door. You're going to see the defendant come and answer that door. But remember, she said twice, he's on the ground. Twice, she said she's performed CPR. She would later tell law enforcement when they interviewed her that day that she was performing CPR for over 10 minutes on Alexavier's body. Why is this important? Deputy Karsten Jar is the first on scene. He knocks on the front door repeatedly until the defendant opens the door. And she says, in a very calm tone, "We don't usually use the front door." You're going to get to see her demeanor. All captured on body camera. The very next thing she says is, Alex got into my medicine. He gets up at night and he gets into things. Alexavier's body is not on the floor. It's on the defendant's bed. She's on the phone the entire time with 911. She cannot move the body. It would be clearly heard, clearly visible on that 911 call. She says twice the body's on the floor next to medication. They get there while she's still on the phone with 911. You'll see the phone in her hand. And Alexavier's body is on the bed. You're going to hear testimony from Deputy Carson Jar. He was rather new to the job back on February 11th of 2023. He immediately goes in and starts to assess Alexavier. Alexavier's not only on the bed, but Alexavier's hand is tucked inside of his pants. If he was moved from the floor to the bed, his hand would have moved. His hand is tucked in his pants, and you will see that. Deputy Jar rolls Alexavier on his side. The first thing he's doing is saying, "Alex, Alex," trying to get a response from him. And he rolls him onto his side to see if he can startle Alexavier awake. Making this small movement of Alexavier's body causes this really dark, almost black-like substance to start to leak from Alexavier's mouth. He cuts open his shirt. Shortly after that, backup is responding on scene, and they're assisting with CPR. Another law enforcement agent with the La Crosse County Sheriff's Department. And that person instructs Deputy Jar to administer Narcan because it looks like a potential overdose scene. The defendant says that there's a pill bottle on the floor. She's claiming that Alexavier got into the drugs, and they're finding a child that is unresponsive, and he has foam and now a black substance from the small step of moving his body to the side, leaking out. They administer Narcan to no avail. Alexavier still remains pulseless and not breathing. So they start performing CPR on his chest. Deputy Jar does 2 pumps on Alexavier while he's still on the bed, and the black substance starts to ooze out more. Remember this defendant said she performed CPR? Remember this defendant said she performed CPR for 10 minutes? He does 2 pumps and moves the body on its side, and this black substance is oozing out of Alexavier's body. The other officer that is on scene has more experience, and he instructs Deputy Jar to move the body to the floor because it's a more stable place to perform CPR. And indeed, that would have made sense if that's really what happened with the defendant. They move Alexavier to the floor, and they start performing CPR again and again and again. They attach a defibrillator-like machine to administer shock, if possible, and to see if they're getting any reading from Alexavier's body. They're getting none. As they continue to pump and perform CPR on Alexavier's 6-year-old body, the black substance just starts oozing out more and more. It pools behind his head. There is so much. And unfortunately, you're going to see it. Have to, because it's one of the things that you have to see in order to assess her credibility and her claims. Deputy Jar performs CPR on Alexavier for almost 9 minutes. Remember, the defendant said she claimed 10 minutes. He performs for almost 9 minutes before it's turned over to first responders, medical first responders that arrive on scene. During that entire time, he gets no response from 6-year-old Alexavier's body. During that entire time, the substance continues to ooze from Alexavier's body. As he's performing CPR, he asks the defendant, "When's the first time you observed Alexavier this morning?" She says 20 minutes ago. When he's asking this question, he's just getting on scene, which means that that's a long time before she even called 911. When's the last time you saw Alexavier alive and well? Next question that Deputy Jar asks. Defendant's response, 3 o'clock in the morning. As Deputy Jar is performing CPR on Alexavier's body, after he's been moved to the floor, he finds an empty pill bottle on the floor. The pill bottle that the defendant talked about. It has a prednisone label on it. The cap is off it. You're going to hear that DNA testing was performed on that pill bottle. You're going to hear that Alexavier's DNA was found on that pill bottle. You're also going to hear about touch DNA, how touch DNA gets transferred from an object to an object. One of the things I want you to have in your mind when you hear that testimony is that Deputy Jar has performed CPR on Alexavier for a number of minutes, bare skin to bare skin, hands to chest. He is touching Alexavier's DNA time and time again. And then he grabs that pill bottle and cap and he moves it. When the medical team arrives on scene, they try CPR for an additional 5 minutes. They don't get a response from Alexavier. No pulse, no breathing, no heart rate. And at 9:44 a.m. on February 11th of 2023, 6-year-old Alexavier J. Pedrin was pronounced deceased. Sergeant John Williams arrived on scene shortly thereafter, and he interviewed the defendant about the circumstances surrounding Alexavier's passing. The defendant said that she was up with Alexavier until 3 o'clock in the morning, and that he was by her side in her bed, the very location that he is found the next day. The defendant spoke on the phone with a friend named Laura Lee Raines at approximately 10:44 p.m. This phone call lasts for about 16 minutes. Laura Lee Raines confirms that this phone call took place. Laura Lee Raines also confirms something else. She could hear Alexavier's voice through the phone. She could tell it was him. He sounded fine. When the defendant woke up the next morning, after going to bed sometime after 3 a.m. in the very same bed as 6-year-old Alexavier, she says she wakes up and she can't find him. Think about where his body is located, where law enforcement arrives on scene, and think about that claim. She says she wakes up and she can't find him. She's in the very same bed as him when she wakes up. She said she ultimately finds him on the floor, and she started performing CPR. You know about that now. The first person she calls is not 911. The first person that she calls is her mother. She talks to her mother for 52 seconds. You're going to hear from the defendant's mother. The defendant's mother told law enforcement that she instructed the defendant to call 911. The defendant's mother instructed the defendant to call 911. Not only that, but in a later conversation, the defendant's mother admitted that the defendant said she thought about performing CPR but froze. Very different than what she told law enforcement. She said she performed CPR for upwards of 10 minutes when she ultimately located Alexavier on the floor. You're going to hear that well over 3 minutes pass between the phone call that the defendant placed with her mother and when she decides to call 911. A lot of things can be accomplished in 3+ minutes. Deputies Anderson and Deputy Jar, the first two responders, the two that performed CPR on Alexavier's body, were informed of the defendant's statement. They were aware of the circumstances that they were presented with, and they said, it doesn't make sense. There is no way a person could perform CPR and not have that substance immediately ooze out. It was inconsistent with their experience that day. Once again, during this interview, the defendant said, he must have gotten into my bag of medication that morning. The prescription capsule that was on the floor was empty. It was for prednisone. You're going to hear that Sergeant Amundsen executed a search warrant at the residence later on. They collected all the prescription bottles that were in that bag. You're going to see every single one of those prescriptions that were in that bag. There are 20 prescription bottles in the defendant's bag of medication. Every single prescription matched the pills that were inside of the container. Every single prescription in that bag matched the pills that were in the container. Why is that important? Because when toxicology was performed on Alexavier, the results came back with Xanax, not prednisone, a very different substance. Xanax is a central nervous system decompressant, shuts it down, slows it down. It's not prednisone. But what Sergeant Amundsen also found in that bag, that prescription bottle that was supposed to be for prednisone, the only pills that were loose in the bottom of that bag were prednisone pills. 10 prednisone pills were in the bottom of that bag, and a bottle that was for 12 prescription prednisone pills. Meaning someone emptied that container in that bag before it was left. Either that or Alexavier, a 6-year-old child, if you want to believe the defendant, emptied that pill bottle, and the only pill bottle that had a mix of pills was the one he chose, and the only pills that he selected were the Xanax pills in that mix. Somebody emptied the pill bottle into that bag. Somebody staged the scene. That somebody's in the room. Law enforcement did a search warrant of the residence not once but twice, and we'll talk about the reasons why. They did search warrants for phone records, not just the defendant's phone records, but also Derek Pedrin's phone records. Not just the Facebook records of the defendant, but also Derek Pedrin's records. They did a search warrant for the prescription medications belonging to this defendant. And they did a search warrant for the defendant's surveillance camera system. The defendant had a surveillance camera system inside the residence. Cameras on the outside, cameras on the inside. You're going to hear from Sergeant Amundsen. One of the things that he will admit he wished he did the first day they were on scene is when he looked at the cameras, they have SD cards that record what's happening. He saw them, and in the midst of all the chaos that's happening in the processing of that scene, and I want you to remember, they initially believe when they're on scene that this may be an overdose. They don't have the toxicology results. They don't have all of the bruising, though they start to see it, what's on the outside. They have no idea about what happened to Alexavier internally. So that autopsy is performed days later. They apply for a secondary search warrant to the residence to go back, amongst other things, to get those SD cards. That search warrant is executed weeks later. By the time that search warrant is executed, those SD cards and the cameras, they're gone. Law enforcement doesn't end there. They apply for a search warrant to the company that actually runs these cameras. And the company doesn't upload the videos to their own server, but they create a cloud-based account that only the person who has the camera and the videos can access. And so the only way law enforcement can get access to those videos is if they take on the identity of the person who's responsible for that video surveillance system. And so they attempt to do that. They get the name and the password for this defendant in the surveillance system. And they sign in. And they start trying to look for the videos. And as they are looking for the videos are being deleted. As they are looking for the videos, the surveillance videos, attempting to capture the videos of what took place in the residence, those videos are being deleted. There's only one person who had access to that account. Ladies and gentlemen, she's in the room. As these search warrant returns start coming back, they start revealing more information about what was really happening during the evening of February 10th, 2023. Remember, the defendant said and told law enforcement that she was on the phone with Laura Lee Raines for about 16 minutes, and then she said that she watched TV with Alexavier until about 3 o'clock in the morning. When law enforcement starts getting the search warrant returns, it reveals that the defendant is having a conversation with another man. Between approximately 6 p.m. and just before midnight, she's exchanged over 100 text messages with this other man, Rafael Suarez. They're setting up a date for the next day. You're going to see those messages. You're going to see what they were talking about. You're going to see that they were planning on meeting up. Between midnight and 2 o'clock in the morning, there's 63 additional text messages between the defendant and Mr. Suarez. Again, talking about the date, talking about what they like about each other, flirting, sexting. Law enforcement also discovers the first text message that the defendant sends the next morning, the morning that Alexavier is found deceased, is at 9:07 a.m. Remember, the phone call to 911 is at 9:25 a.m. At 9:07 a.m., she texts Laura Lee telling her that's cute. At 9:20 a.m., she texts Rafael Suarez telling him, we're not going to be able to get together today. Something's wrong with my son. At 9:21, she calls her mother, talks to her mother for 52 seconds, and then 3 minutes and 19 seconds pass after that phone call is concluded until she calls 911. None of that information is disclosed by the defendant to law enforcement. Because of the circumstances surrounding Alexavier's death, Child Protective Services implements a safety plan. The children that were in the home that day and that evening are put into placements not involving the defendant, and they can't involve Derek Pedrin because he's in jail. I want to talk a little bit about Derek Pedrin. Derek Pedrin is a domestic abuser. He's an abuser of women. One of the women that he abused is Ms. Dikeman. He's been prosecuted for it before by the La Crosse County District Attorney's Office. On February 10th of 2023, there was a no contact order in place. Derek Pedrin was to have no contact with Josie Dikeman because of this domestic abuse. Derek Pedrin went to work that day, got off at 5 p.m. You're going to see his time card, which validates that information. He went to a local store, I believe it's a Walgreens or a Walmart. He's on video surveillance, shopping at that store for a few minutes, and then he arrives home at approximately 5:30 in the evening. At the same time that he's arriving home, or just a little bit after, the La Crosse County Sheriff's Department is getting a phone call from a concerned family member about the safety of Alexavier. Not because Derek's in the home. They have no idea that Derek is in the home. Concern is about this defendant being with Alexavier. And so law enforcement goes out at 7 o'clock that evening to perform a welfare check on Alexavier. You're going to see the body cam from the two law enforcement personnel who went out that evening. They knock on the door multiple times. You can actually see Derek Pedrin in the residence, walking around with his hat on, with his work sweatshirt on. And when they're knocking on the door, they're saying repeatedly, "We're here to do a welfare check." They want to see Alexavier and make sure he's okay. They are eventually allowed in by the defendant. When they tell the defendant that they believe that they've seen Derek inside the residence, the defendant lies. She says it's another man. When they confront her with the belief that they have seen Derek inside the residence and they know what Derek looks like, they say that they just want to know where he is, she says he's left the residence, he being the other man, not Derek. And law enforcement informs her that that's impossible because they have people positioned on both sides of the house at both doors. There was no way anyone left that residence while they saw the person, while they had the conversation with her. She lied. Even with all of that, the predominant responsibility of law enforcement was checking on Alexavier. So they ask if they can just see Alexavier. The defendant allows them to approach Alexavier. They shine a flashlight on Alexavier, and they start asking questions about, remember, that single scratch above his head. That's the only injury they observe on his body when they see him. He's laying on the couch. The defendant says he has COVID and he's trying to sleep. The defendant eventually becomes frustrated with law enforcement being present. She tells them to get out of the house, and she tells them, "You need to get a warrant." Law enforcement leaves the residence because that's her right, and they are respecting her right. They're outside, they're calling their superior officers to find out what they should do next. Do they want to apply for a search warrant because they believe they've seen Derek? Do they want to wait Are they going to leave? You're going to hear that one of the officers even calls Josie, the defendant, and talks to her and says, "No, it's Derek inside. Please just convince him to come out." Within minutes, Derek comes out, and you're going to see all of that. They tell Derek that he's violating the no contact order. They tell Derek that he can have a smoke, he's cooperative, that they'll call his boss and let him know everything that happened. Then Derek is taken into custody just after 7 p.m. The law enforcement checks on Alexavier one more time. They go back into the residence, and originally Alexavier's laying down. Now he's positioned differently on the couch. He's able to move. He's able to function. They see him positioned on the back of the couch. They check on him. They ask questions of the defendant. And the defendant says, "He's just sick with COVID. Nothing's amiss. Please leave. You're scaring him." So they leave. Derek Pedrin could not be in the residence during the evening because he was in jail that entire evening. That will be confirmed by law enforcement. It will be confirmed because one of the people that the defendant talks to the morning after Alexavier has been found is Derek. Talks to him that evening on a jail call. It's recorded. She texts with him that morning after he's been released. And Alexavier has been found deceased. The messages that she sends, Derek, "It's my fault." Messages that she sends Rafael Suarez, the person that she was talking to that evening, "I feel like this is my fault." She messages multiple people that the death of Alexavier is her fault. Sergeant Amundsen and the medical examiner, when they responded on scene, looked at Alexavier's body, and they saw the injuries that were visible on the outside of his body. And they said, this needs to be looked at and investigated a little bit more. So forensic interviews of the children were set up the very next day. The children that were forensically interviewed were placed in different homes. One of the children that was interviewed was Major Hellrud. He has a different father. His father is not Derek. His father is Mark Hellrud. He was placed with his father. You're going to also see the forensic interview of 5-year-old Brantley. This is what 5-year-old Brantley had to say about what he has seen with his 5-year-old eyes in this defendant's home. Alexavier steals food. You're going to find out why a 6-year-old child needs to steal food. When this defendant finds out that he steals food in the middle of the night, she kicks him in his chest and in his body. She used to strike Alexavier with a spoon or a spatula when he was younger, but it's moved on to kicks and blows with the hands. She also chokes Alexavier. You're going to get to hear in this 5-year-old child's own words what seeing his deceased 6-year-old brother was like. He said his 6-year-old brother looked like a monster. On the morning of February 11th, 2023. He said, probably because adults told him, his brother drank poison water. That's what took his life. In the midst of all that, he described what his 5-year-old eyes saw this defendant do. Major was 8 years old when he was forensically interviewed. My mom yells at Alexavier a lot. Major was asked during the forensic interview about home life with his dad and home life with his mother, the defendant. When he talks about home life with his dad, he's talking about it openly and freely as I'm talking to you right now. When he's asked about home life with his mother, he crawls up into a ball, his voice gets quieter, he starts to shut down. My mom hits Alexavier, not us. She kicks Alexavier a lot. She kicks him in his chest. She kicks him in his face. The forensic interviewer asks if there's other times that 8-year-old Major has witnessed Alexavier stop breathing. And he says in this really quiet tone, "My mom caused it." The interviewer actually asks him to speak up because she can't hear it. And he discloses that his mother, the defendant, chokes Alexavier with her hands. She's done it before, and she did it just a few days ago. The choking, the kicking, the striking with the hands, it all happens when Derek is gone, when Dad is gone. Both Brantley and Major, independently, talk about this defendant kicking, this defendant choking, this defendant hitting, and they both talk about it happening when Derek is not home. Major confirms that Alexavier gets up in the middle of the night searching for food. This is something the defendant even talks about. He almost blames 6-year-old Alexavier for the fact that she has to stay up all night and watch him. Major talks about when this defendant feeds Alexavier, she takes hot sauce and puts it on his food. He doesn't want to eat it with hot sauce. He doesn't like hot sauce. It's not done to anybody else, only Alexavier. When Alexavier gets up at night and tries to find something to eat or drink because he doesn't want the food that has hot sauce all over it, that this defendant makes special just for him, the defendant's response is to choke him. Remember again that the hypoxic ischemic injury to the brain. And one of the ways that that is caused is through choking. She also steps on him. And in the past, when he was younger, she used a spoon or a spatula to strike Alexavier. Again, just like what Brantley said, they're in 2 different homes with 2 different caretakers being brought for these forensic interviews by completely different adults, having no idea what the other child is saying, and they're both reporting the same things. A forensic interview was conducted of 4-year-old Araya. You're going to hear from the interviewer who conducted all of these forensic interviews, and she's going to inform you that 3 to 4 years old are about the earliest you can actually conduct a forensic interview of a child. You're not going to get a whole lot of information from a child at that age and cognitive developmental levels. They just don't have the words, the vocabulary that children who are older have. But even this 4-year-old child can talk about the difference in how Alexavier is treated in the home. Remember Alexavier had that broken femur? I want to talk about that for a little bit. Alexavier suffered a femur fracture in January of 2023. The story given to the medical professionals by the defendant at the hospital is that 4-year-old Araya pushed Alexavier down the stairs. As she didn't see it, she saw the aftermath of the fall and heard it. Araya, in her forensic interview, says that she pushed her brother down the stairs. A lot of the other children who were not present when the fall happened heard that Araya pushed Alexavier down the stairs, and so they too talk about Araya pushing Alexavier down the stairs. Alexavier is not taken in for that femur fracture until 2 days after. You're going to hear about his pain level when he's admitted to the hospital with that femur fracture. You're going to hear that this is an unusual femur fracture that requires a great amount of force to that particular bone in the body. The femur bone is the largest bone in our bodies. And his is broken, and his is broken in a way that requires great force. A femur fracture from a fall downstairs is extraordinarily rare. But we have Araya reporting that that's what happened. And we have Alexavier, when he's at the hospital, looking at his mother and then saying that that's what happened. After she has said that's what happened. After Alexavier's death, Major stays in his dad's home. And he starts talking to his dad about the circumstances surrounding Alexavier's femur fracture. And Major remembers and tells his dad that he witnessed this defendant take Alexavier's leg and bend it and keep bending it forcefully while Alexavier was screaming in pain around the same time that the femur fracture supposedly happened from a stairway fall. Out of concern about this disclosure, the father calls law enforcement. A second forensic interview is set up of Major. You're going to see that second forensic interview. You're going to see Major reaffirm all the abuse he talked about witnessing at the hands of this defendant to Alexavier, and you're going to hear him talk about the bending of that leg and what he saw. You're going to hear people who saw Alexavier that weekend at a party and how he had to be carried from room to room to room because he could not walk. Attorney Zachar said something in his opening, his board diary yesterday, and I completely agree with it. You are going to hear situations where this defendant is the only person to blame. There is plenty of blame in this case that belongs to Derek Pedrin too for neglecting Alexavier. But we're not here for that in the next couple weeks. We're here to decide her culpability. Days go by, he's taken to the hospital with this leg fracture. You're going to hear the pain medication that he had to be treated with, how it was casted, and how he was completely immobilized and kept from walking on that leg. Kept under 24-hour supervision. You're also going to hear that when he was hospitalized, the person that he found most comforting was his father. The person that brought him the most comfort in the room was his dad, who would get in bed next to him. During the course of the investigation, the decision was made by law enforcement that they had enough evidence to arrest the defendant. In that process, law enforcement was interviewing Derek Pedrin. Derek Pedrin was cooperative with law enforcement. When they informed Derek Pedrin of the drugs that were found in Alexavier's system, he admitted to purchasing those drugs. He admitted to purchasing those drugs for this defendant and delivering those drugs to this defendant. Knowing all the injuries on his 6-year-old son's body, Derek Pedrin also recorded conversations with this defendant, where he asked her, he wanted to know what happened to his son. He gave those to law enforcement. In those conversations, she not once ever says he did something wrong, that he's responsible. This is well over a month later. Instead, she tells him, move on. His death is in the past. We have to get over it. This is a father searching for answers surrounding the death, the beating death of his 6-year-old son. She's saying, move on and get over it. The other thing that law enforcement found when they did the search warrants was text messages between this defendant and her own mother surrounding getting access to pills. And this defendant's own mother confirming that she will give pills to the defendant. And then setting up arrangements for Derek to get the pills for this defendant. That's her mother. When law enforcement goes and questions her mother with a search warrant in hand to search her residence, at first she denies ever engaging in that behavior. Then law enforcement tells her that they have the messages. She reluctantly confirms that this defendant sought pills from her. Law enforcement also tells her, we have a search warrant for your phone. This defendant's response to the search warrant for her own phone is to inform law enforcement that the defendant asked for her phone some time ago and cleared it because the defendant was concerned. And that's not all the evidence you're going to hear. For the end of this case, you're going to hear evidence concerning this defendant and another child from 2011 and 2013. The judge is going to give you a special instruction on that evidence after you receive that evidence, and it is imperative that you follow and listen to that instruction. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence will be clear at the end of this trial. This defendant is responsible for the death of Alexavier J. Pedrin. This defendant did everything she could to create a scene to try and cover her actions surrounding the death of Alexavier J. Pedrin. This defendant destroyed evidence to protect herself during the investigation into her culpability into the death of Alexavier J. Pedrin. At the end of this trial, I will come before you and I will ask you, based on all of the evidence you will hear over the next 2 to 3 weeks, to find this defendant guilty.
Thank you.